And since we have also here the members of the first panel, Elena, Edward, and Giancarlo, I would love to propose to open the floor for questions and comments for all 6 presentations. Unfortunately, we miss the lady from the West Point Academy, but okay. So the floor is yours, dear colleagues. Feel free to comment or ask, please. Yes, please.
I have a question about the presentation on religion.
Sure.
I was wondering whether, so obviously you've only had a limited amount of time in the archive, and you mentioned that you thought you saw some kind of continuity between the approach in Hungary and Poland, and I can see why that would be. And I wonder how different. Sorry. I wonder how different your conclusions would be if you looked at different case studies. For example, if you looked at Czechoslovakia, where religion is not as popular, or Romania, where it's a different kind of religion.
Sure.
Rather than 2 Catholic countries.
Sure. Yeah, that's something that I really want to do. I want to make the focus of my work, especially in regards to RFE, a comparative study. The OSA archives are great. They have a vast amount of research there, but I think really where I need to go is the Hoover Institute at Stanford, because it's at Hoover where they have the more of the internal papers, the internal policies, whereas OSA had more of the research division, which is great for those who want to retrace the developments and the movements within the countries themselves, but not as much how RFE responded to these things. My thesis would be to find what that uniform policy would be, because as I tried to do in my introduction, RFE comes from the Free Europe Committee, and at its founding, they had a conception of what religious freedom was. And so while my theory, my thesis is that while the internal dynamics of different countries would be different, and I'm glad you mentioned this, the different countries have different populations of different religious groups that are more prevalent than others, and there's different forms of persecution or lack thereof in these countries. I think the Free Europe Committee's conception is, even as we saw in the balloons, the 12, I forget the word it was, demands. There's a particularly American, I would say, conception of what is freedom of religion, and I think I would imagine you see that play out in a comparative study.
And if I may add to it, and it's the problematic of religion also evolved by time. I mean, dealing with religion or propagating religion in the 1950s was something different than it was in the 1970s and 80s. And if I may to add 2 suggestions, maybe it would be worth to look at the people-to-people interaction, which is also important in the policy of the United States. I mean, there were plenty of occasions when American citizens were encouraged to send postcards at Easter, at Christmas time to Eastern Europe. It was a kind of a people. And also, somewhere I saw the name of Alfred Reich. I think it was, Sarah, your presentation. And also the book mailing project included a huge amount of Bibles and different kind of stuff. It's just a suggestion. It might focus your topic. Further questions, please.
Thank you. Let's have a question for you, actually. So it's quite easy geographically to define an East German woman, but how do you define a Soviet woman? And in your research that you started, are you finding it problematic, the use of the term of a Soviet, which could mean a Tajik woman, an Armenian woman?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I think it's very problematic. And I think that's the use of the word Soviet woman is mainly from RFE, and it's from American newspapers, of course. Whereas the West German newspapers are more specific, and they will talk about the East German woman, because I mean this was their direct counterpart, basically. So I think it's a very important nuance to make. Yeah.
Thank you. And I would like to add maybe two things. Thank you very much for raising the issue of women. I think issue of women and different aspects of women's life was surely one of the major topics what the researchers of the RFE were keen on.
Yes.
They collected different kinds of statistics. Now, here you have to be very cautious because the analysts of the RFE mostly work with open sources, meaning papers, magazines, dailies from Eastern European. But what the fascinating thing is that they put together, so they work was based on primary sources from Eastern European sources, but they put together a multilingual and a multi-perspective picture, and then they discovered the differences between countries. And my suggestion is that perhaps your topic and the women's topic is linked with a general problem of population growth, or on the vice versa, and the abortion.
Yeah.
And it's also dealt with by different kind of analysis at the RFE. It's a wonderful topic, though it's very sensitive, and but I think it's worth researching, and you surely will find many sources to this. Thank you. Questions, please.
Thank you all for your papers. You've made me very proud. So thank you. I wanted to press on two things. One was this idea of the kind of this Cold War civil religion in the United States. In other words, there was this, what do we mean when we talk about religion? And I think this goes back to the question that was asked about what is kind of the idea of a national religion. And there was thought in some of the literature of the field that even the United States, when we were trying to attract the Middle East into our Cold War bastion, that we would even consider Muslims to be a part of this civil religion, which is very interesting. And that brings me to the post-World War question, the Jewish question. Because, are we really talking about Christianity? Or are we talking about some larger notion of religion? And this is where I think it also goes into Lotta's earlier work on the Nuremberg trials. So in the RFE reporting of the Nuremberg trials, perhaps there's something that you can glean from that. So maybe the two of you wanted to chat about that. And also for women, this very important question of the post-World War II moment, when there aren't many men left, right? So what is the place of the woman in this crisis time, really? Let's not forget that the Cold War, the Second World War and the Cold War absolutely butt one another. And so you've got the loss of so many male lives. And of course this brings in the question of abortion and also post-traumatic stress syndrome and alcoholism and other things. So at any rate, those were my two questions. And Sarah, I hope that you and Callie Peace will work together in the future. I'm sensing that you and David and Callie could write a great joint article. So congratulations.
Would you like to reflect on this?
Should we get
Sure, I'll say one thing.
I can maybe start. Yeah. Thank you. So I will very quickly thank you for the point on women. We'll be talking about it. I have an idea in the future. The one thing I wanted to say regarding your point about what I've worked on before is that it wasn't so much about the Nuremberg trials, but when I was at Stanford last year, I looked at the sort of an internal RFE debate about whether to program radio specifically for Jews or not, and whether they would program in Yiddish or not. And they, of course, decided not to do it, sort of because of anti-Semitism. I think both within the Soviet Union, but also in the United States. But that's a very interesting debate that I hope you'll potentially be able to touch on. And I just want to say one thing to Giancarlo, but I'm gonna hope we're gonna draw the first panel also in the debate, which is actually related to this, which is that of course Yehudi Menuhin is Jewish, and it made me wonder about whether the orchestra that you're talking about. So it made me really curious who the musicians were, and I'm gonna guess that at least a number of them would have been Jewish. And there's also a sort of Jewish internationalism in culture, perhaps at the time, that would be really interesting to discuss. But I'll give it to you now. Thank you.
So there's a really great book. His name is Kevin Schultz. It's called Tri-Faith America, and he argues that during this time period, 40s and 50s, America sort of opens itself up in a greater way to the understanding of religion not being defined explicitly by Protestantism, but by the Judeo-Christian tradition. Not necessarily Islam, but Jews, Christians, and Catholics, or Protestants and Catholics. And I've done more research on VOA in this way, but they put together advisory councils that were of these three religions. So it was the Jewish Synagogue of America, it was the National Catholic Welfare Conference, and then the Federal Council of Churches for Protestantism. So at least these three religions were represented for Voice of America. Again, it's my hunch that I'm going to find the same thing about the Free Europe Committee. At its founding, they had an influential, or maybe he's influential, I don't know, I need to find out, fellow by the last name of Taft, who works for the Federal Council of Churches, which was an ecumenical organization, more so than other Protestant organizations at this time. And again, my hunch is I'm going to find influential voices from various faiths at the founding, but I have to do the research.
Sarah, would you like to add anything?
The junk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question. Yes, please.
Oh, sure,
Question.
I can respond. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lotta, for your question. And I actually had one for you that I was tentatively raising my hand for, so maybe I'll follow.
We can keep going back and forth.
Exactly. No, I think your point is very well founded. So this research started at the Rockefeller Archive Center in January or so, which was where I first came upon the Philharmonia Hungarica because the Ford Foundation was so involved in its founding. And I think that kind of reviewing those documents is very much in order. This week and this presentation was very much focused on what I found at Open Society.
Yeah.
And I think that would be very good, because I would imagine there are kind of more testimonials, more individual based things regarding the individual musicians. I will say that I also managed to speak to Professor Dick, who Sarah referenced in her presentation, who's actually a high school classmate of Zoltan Roznyai, who was one of the founding conductor of the Philharmonia Hungarica, which was very fascinating. He has cool yearbook photos, and he did mention that he didn't necessarily keep in touch with Zoltan that much after, but when they did catch up, sometimes Zoltan would complain about some of the musicians talking about other musicians behind the back, and one of the anti-Semitism did certainly come up between the musicians, so that was kind of frustrating for him. But certainly, so definitely following up and finding real archival documentation would be great. My question, kind of going back to your presentation, congratulations to all of you, is that I'm certainly not a gender historian or a historian of gender and women's studies, but I think that one of the things that I've found in kind of doing reading for it in class is often that women or woman is a very broadly used term in that, and I think that there are a lot of instances where we talk about divorce. Divorce is very different than, say, the politics of women as consumers that emerge, in kind of the FRG. So I'm wondering if over the course of your research, that maybe you're looking at perhaps like phases of womanhood, even starting. I think you were spot on talking about children, but even starting as girls, right? And how this kind of these issues kind of progress as women get older, and adopt more responsibilities, or perhaps have different societal expectations at different points in their lives.
I'm going to be very brief, yeah. Yeah, I'll be very brief because it'll take up too much time.
No, it's all right. We still have 15 minutes of this course.
But thank you very much for your point. I think when it comes to girls, I think we'll wait until Tinatin's presentation tomorrow to talk about that. Because as I said, I would like to give others the opportunity to speak. But you're, of course, right that it's a much more sort of varied concept than maybe I was able to show today. I do think I also don't necessarily see myself as a gender person. I mean, women are half the population. That's why we study them, and it doesn't immediately mean that it's gender history. I just wanted to make that point.
Right, sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, next question, please.
Hi, I just wanted to talk about the second one, which seems a long time ago now. I know.
But we still remember.
Well, I took notes, so I don't actually remember what my question was, but I remember what I wrote down. So basically, I feel like, from the British perspective, that Suez was the moment that we progressed from colonialism to neo-colonialism, with the help of a pretty hefty push from America. The lack of American support really is what decided it, at least in my opinion. But the idea of being civilized is what remained. So the core of British colonialism was that we were civilized and that the other, however you define the other, was not. And that is how we built our justification for our colonialism. And in vis-a-vis with the Soviet Union, we were civilized and America was civilized, and the Soviet Unions were the new barbarians. So this kind of soft versus hard power, this kind of neo-colonial ideas about controlling the economy, controlling companies, but there being on the surface freedom, was for me the difference. That we broke the golden rule of America post-45, which is you have to play the game. You have to make it look like you are civilized, like there is human rights and freedom, and it's just the market deciding. And we broke the rule, and they punished us. Rightly, but still. And I think that this is one of the reasons why America had problems convincing people in the third world, because they could see the neo-colonialism, whereas the people in Hungary, for example, neo-colonialism looks pretty good. Yeah, they control the company instead of riding tanks through the thing. So maybe this was my interpretation, the difference in reaction centered around actually American, Western, British ideas about civilization, and also whether or not we were undermining them significantly. I know it's not really a question. I swear I had one.
Yeah, sure. I have a couple of points to make on that. The first one is that when I was doing some preliminary research with the BBC's treatment of the Hungarian Revolution and the Suez Crisis, something that struck me was that in Alan Webb's London Calling is that he talks about the BBC reported a lot earlier in 1956 as Nasser's conducting these arms trade deal with the USSR, this kind of pushback against a Soviet imperialism, something that I kind of talked about being more prevalent within the UN in 1962, but we see it within the BBC in 1956, and I think that's an interesting dimension to what you were saying about the British project of colonialism as being the civilized people and the USSR being uncivilized, because if the Soviet Union is conducting this imperialism in Eastern Europe, are they also then implicitly civilized as well? I think that's an interesting kind of counter question or point to what you were bringing up.
I mean that it progressed. After pre-45, we could do this in a hard way because we were civilized. Mm-hmm. But it became more nuanced post-45 as we moved into neo-colonialism. And instead of saying this hard colonialism became uncivilized, it became not a civilized way to behave. And I think it's mirrored in a lot of Western history, even the civil rights movement at this time. etc., it's because people they reassessed what it meant to be civilized. But it didn't stop us viewing others as uncivilized. And if you watch the rhetoric on the Middle East now, we never stopped. And whether or not we ever will, I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know as much about it with regard to my presentation, but it's certainly something that existed at the time, and both like implicitly and explicitly, and it's something that would be interesting to research further.
May I have a follow-up question on this? I was fascinated, Edward, to hear your presentation, and I love the point you made from the perspective of the United Nations. I would like to ask you a question if you came across any source or any evidence or any matter regarding the political feature of the Radio Free Europe. I mean, did you find any source at the level of National Committee for Free Europe, either, or on the level of the political advisor allocated to the RFE, William Griffith? I think at that time he was the person in charge, telling anything about how RFE should behave in the crisis, during the crisis of the any guidance, any guideline for the political management of the radio.
For which crisis?
So did you find anything about they saying that now, guys, this is the way you should behave, or the way you should present the Suez crisis in the radio?
Okay.
I hope the question is clear. Thank you.
Yeah. So I have not been to the Hoover Institute as well, and I think that's where a lot of these types of documents would be found. I was mostly, when I was in the OSA, within the research and evaluation files, specifically for the Hungarian unit, because I think that's the largest source in English of research units among the different countries. And yeah, I didn't really find too much about I currently haven't found a unified, perspective that the RFE should have taken regarding the Suez crisis. I actually haven't really found that much about how they reported on it in general. I think compared to the BBC, it was not reported on as much, and certainly in Hungary, where RFE was very involved and integrated within the Hungarian uprising, I think just like focuses were a little shifted. But it was definitely something that I encountered documents where people were complaining about the amount of coverage that the BBC was giving to Suez compared to the Hungarian Revolution, whereas this was not something that ever came up as a complaint against RFE. So I think we can assume it wasn't as widely covered.
Interesting. Thank you. Professor Bekish.
Thank you very much. Let me make a couple of comments and questions. First of all, to my pleasure, the name of István Deák, Professor István Deák, was mentioned several times by the presenters, and I know from him personally that 3 of the RFE fellows have made interviews, personal interviews with István Deák, who was very glad to share his experiences. More than that, I sent him to the link, so maybe he's watching right now. So this is the right time to give some good feedback, and I'm sure he was very happy if he could listen to this already. Then other thing is the 1956 issue, Suez, Hungary, and the kind of emerging debate about how to be civilized in a crisis when you are the oppressor. So the idea is, of course, that now the end game was like this, that the British could actually solve it in a civilized way, and the Soviets did not solve it in such a way. Well, of course, it would be the last thing for me to praise the Soviet Union in the case of the Hungarian Revolution. However, from a historical perspective, we have to make justice, in a sense that we have to say that in the first intervention, in the case of the first intervention on the 24th of October, that is the initial first intervention by the Soviet Union, the original goal, the original political and military goal was exactly to put an end to the emerging uprising in a so-called civilized way, that is in a soft way. That actually meant demonstration of power. It meant only intimidation. It was meant to frighten the people and give them the message, please go home, because otherwise there will be a very bad end of this game. The model was the East German uprising in 1953. In 1953, this Soviet model, this Soviet strategy actually did work very well. They could actually solve the problem. They could put down the uprising in one day. And this did not work in Hungary. It did not work in Hungary. Actually, it was oil on the fire. They achieved exactly the opposite of what they actually had wanted. They wanted to pacify the society by sending in the troops and sending the message, okay, it's not worth dying. Okay, so let's go home. But it didn't happen, and the Hungarians actually started to fight back and fight the Soviet army, and that's how it became actually a freedom fight. And this freedom fight, by the very end, actually gave no other option to the Soviet Union just to put it down in such a drastic way as it happened during the second Soviet intervention on the 4th of November, which was basically fundamentally different from the first one. The first one was actually based on an idea and on an order that the Soviet troops were given an order: don't shoot only if you are shot at. You can only shoot back, but you cannot shoot on the people. So it was very different. And in the second case, on the 4th of November, it was shoot on everything moving. Okay, so and then it was about destroy everything. There is no price high enough to put down this uprising. So that's the kind of complex story of the Soviet decision-making and military solution in the case of Hungary in 1956. The other thing is a kind of a suggestion or even a question to Sarah about the Hungarian broadcasts and all kind of other messages going to Hungary between 53 and 56, before the revolution, not during, but before the revolution. Because what you could see from your cartoons and all the PowerPoint presentations, of course that's the kind of thing which we know, how the message was to stand up against the communist system, try to undermine the communist system as much as you can, and this was going on quite well up until the revolution. However, from a political history perspective, we also know that this was, especially the first part, 53, 55, was the time when the Imre government itself actually was trying to do a lot of things, to mollify the situation in the country. So in that sense, the kind of very aggressive policy of Radio Free Europe was in a way, even by many people at least, even harmful. Because they actually tried to undermine something which was actually happening by itself. And then, technically, it could also benefit the kind of conservative forces of Rákosi and others who actually came back into power in the spring of 1955, when Imre Nagy, with his reform politics, was actually ousted. So the question is here whether it would be worth making a comparison with the Polish case. Because in Poland, again, very similar processes were unfolding between 1953 and 1956, and with a very different output and result. As we know, in Poland, the crisis in October 1956 was solved peacefully, without Soviet intervention, without bloodshed, with a compromise. This did not happen in Hungary. The question is whether there is any kind of role or impact of Radio Free Europe, or the Berlin campaigns, or any other RFE type of activities, during those times, which could be investigated and which could be decided upon whether they were similar or they were different. Because in the case of the uprising itself in 1956 and the ongoing parallel Polish crisis in October 1956, now we absolutely surely know that there was a big difference in the management of the issue by the Polish desk in Radio Free Europe and the Hungarian one. By the Polish desk actually was playing a very peaceful, very consolidating role during the whole crisis, supporting Gomulka, who was a communist. Everybody hated the communists, but in Radio Free Europe, okay, in Munich, and still they were wise enough to say, okay, well, this is a communist, but a better communist than what we had earlier, okay, and the best communist we can actually get. So they were realistic, because that was the reality, really. While, as you know, in Hungary, 1956, the Hungarian desk and the Hungarian program actually was against Imre Nagy, you know, up until the last moment, and they wanted to abduct Imre Nagy, who was trying to manipulate somehow and trying to survive between the double pressure from the society and pressure from the Soviets, you know, which was an impossible job anyhow. So this was really a very bad experience in that sense, and we have a very good experience in the case of the Polish case. So the question is whether this could be detected, somehow investigated, whether in the treating of the Polish political events, political transformation between 1953 and 1956, this could be different from the beginning to the end, not only during the crisis itself, but maybe their approach was more realistic than the Hungarian one, which is not true. It is a kind of research question, but I don't know. That's for the young generations to find out, right? And finally, to learn about the GDR gender problem, you know, as they did not know that they had a gender problem or gender issue. At the time, it was not called like that, but it's a very interesting one. And again, I just like to make a couple of suggestions about that. It's really a very good topic to investigate, because what we know about the GDR as such during the, especially 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the GDR was a very unique member of the Soviet bloc in many ways, which we don't have time to go into now. But actually, one thing which very many people do not even imagine, that the highest standard of living in the whole Soviet bloc was in the GDR. A lot of people just wouldn't say this. Yes, it's absolutely true. And the gender issue, that is the position of women, was also very exceptional. Not only because there were too few guys around after the Second World War was mentioned, and this created a problem even afterwards. And of course, the refugees were I don't really know how exactly it was. I mean, the division between the like 3 million from 1949 to 1961, altogether 3 million inhabitants of the GDR left the country, and I suspect that there were more male refugees than female. I'm not sure, but that's something what you also should find out and give the answer. But anyhow, the situation was still there, that they needed not only as labor force, but in any other way in social life as well. So actually, what I just wanted to point out is that it's really a good topic to investigate, because my suspicion is that in the GDR, women had the kind of exceptional treatment. You know, they had the kind of more emancipated status among all the Eastern Bloc countries, you know, because of this very special situation what they were in. So it had many problems and created many problems and shopping lines and all these kind of things. But it happened everywhere. It happened everywhere except for mostly Hungary, not so much. But in Bulgaria, Romania, in the Soviet Union, of course, that was a daily thing. It was not an East German peculiarity. So in that sense, that was not extra. So everybody was suffering from the same things. You know? But they had also benefits. They had extra like qualities or possibilities which many other people did not have, many other women did not have in the other Eastern Bloc countries because of this special situation. So their treatment as legally as well, you know, like single mothers and children, you know, that was absolutely outstanding. In Hungary, even in the 70s, it was a shame. It was a shame to have an illegal child or whatever, or using your own name, which was absolutely impossible. You know, you were looked upon as a terrible person, you know, or somebody who was let down by that guy. And I had a colleague in the archive when I started my career, and when she was in the hospital to give birth to the child, and then the doctors didn't understand why she, as an archivist, kept her own name, and it was in the early 70s, and it was like, what something happened, we are so sorry for you.
Oh.
And she lived in a very nice family and everything was okay, but it was unimaginable in Hungary that somebody actually only used their own name because they wanted to use it. Technically it was possible, legally it was possible, just it was not widespread. It was not general, okay? So, but in the GDR, all that was absolutely different. So that's something which I think is a very good topic because these are just the kind of thing. I'm not a social historian, right? So I know all this from either experience or memories or many other things. It's not my own research. But if you go into this kind of research yourself, I'm sure you will find very many very interesting stuff like this.
Thank you, Professor, for your comments. And since we are still very good at time, still 7 minutes. More questions. There's room for more questions. János, please, first, and gentlemen. Yes?
Thank you. I want to get back to the topic of Radio Free Europe. And as someone interested in intelligence as such, I'd like to ask you, how do you view the core role of Radio Free Europe in your research? Was it influence operation? Was it simply information operation? And how did it evolve in your view? It's a basic definitional question I would like to ask you all, and I'm interested in what you have to say to this. Thank you.
Yes, it also concerns Gianfranco's presentation. He also included CIA.
Yeah.
Feel free to answer the question, please. You can, please.
Sure. So, I think there was a recent release of a ton of CIA documents, I think earlier this past year, that I have not actually managed to search, but I think it's certainly on my bucket list for this project. Yeah, just to see. Certainly, Radio Free Europe played an important role in reconnaissance, not just for its own content, but for kind of providing the most up-to-date information. It certainly had a unique mechanism for doing so, from what I could see. A lot of reports were based on sources on the ground that, a lot of the memorandum just said presumed to be reliable or probably reliable. So I think that kind of the structure of Radio Free Europe, certainly having native language speakers, I think is tremendous as well in gathering really accurate information. I was kind of, I'm sure others can speak more to this just because I was kind of more narrowly focused on music and culture, but certainly the way that you collect that kind of research, even from the local press or even just from people on the ground, is good for intelligence. Absolutely.
I know that the Free Europe Committee was basically started to give emigres something to do, where you have a lot of their early correspondence saying God, all these people who used to be really important in Hungary and wear blue suits now have nothing to do. We need to give the blue suited guys something to do again. And that actually this sort of answers I think one of Professor Bekes's questions, which is that actually led to problems at the Hungarian desk. So when I was speaking to Professor Dejek, he was telling me that there were actually a couple former Nazi Party members who were editors and broadcasters at the desk of Radio Free Europe in Hungary. And then I went and I got some documents from A. Stronson. I think they're from the Frank Otschel papers, and they actually go into detail about a couple of these employees, and it's oh yeah, this guy was a Nazi poet, and this guy was a Nazi thought leader, and so you have these instances where you get some insight into maybe why some of the broadcasts were a bit more inflammatory in the Hungarian desk rather than in the Polish desk. So that was maybe I think part of the problem was maybe that the mission wasn't that clear, or the mission was clear, but then it's well, emigres are people too, and they're going to come with their own baggage and their own background and their own political leanings that the CIA isn't necessarily going to be able to dictate, even though it's funded by the CIA. So it sort of speaks to the problem of, using non-nationals or using, individual human beings with subjectivity. So, yes.
Professor Phillips, please. And then one last question, and then we will wrap it up.
There's a wonderful body of literature on CIA cultural projects. And so, we're kind of going at it the other end. And, when Sarah mentioned the cameras, it was accused that the CIA had cameras on the balloons there, and Giancarlo's chart, there's this incredibly complex matrix of relationships in the digitized CIA volume. There was great interest in modern dancer Martha Graham's airplanes because she, as a cultural agent, could land in places where our planes weren't allowed. So you put a camera on the nose of that thing, and you've got some good news. And also, we were always accusing the Soviet ballet companies of embedding the KGB into them as, set mechanics or lighting designers or something. When indeed our dancers very vividly recall that some person would show up who had never been seen on a crew before and then was never seen again. So the CIA funded and had this, again, very complicated relationship with culture, which is a fascinating study.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Phillips, for your comment. And the last question from the floor, please.
Thank you. So I have a question, or rather a comment, colleague Noel. First, pardon my English, I'm not a native speaker, so I might not be as understandable as other colleagues, but hopefully I will manage. So, first of all, I'm somewhat of a tourist here. My primary research is not in the Cold War history, but rather in the 30s. So I have some insights which might be useful for your research, especially when talking about anti-communism framed with religion, or religious anti-communism. The important thing is that anti-communism is not a child of the Cold War, so to speak. It's been there from the 20s, from the 30s, 40s in the war, and then after the war. Religion played a key part in the anti-communist propaganda in the 30s. For example, a very good sort of comparative perspective would be if you would, of course, not research, but brush up on the literature about the thing called International Commission Pro Deo, for God, which was a privately organized initiative in Geneva, Switzerland, which was, as you've mentioned, in regards to something else, which was ecumenical Christian organization, which was responsible for hundreds and thousands of pieces from all over the world. It had hundreds of members, and it composed a special bulletin, Pro Deo, which was immensely important. If you look at the key figures of the far right in the interwar period, everybody was subscribed to it. Franco was on the subscription from the mid-20s. German Ministry of Propaganda was partly financing it. Sorry, I'm going off topic. What I wanted to say is a lot of it, and preparing for this presentation, I realized how many things in the anti-communist propaganda after the Second World War in the Cold War period were actually inherited from the earlier phases. And I think religion is a really good. I think that this is an assumption under no research to back it up, but what I think is that you would find that a lot of the key prepositions would already be pre-existing and would be only inherited and then furthered in the Cold War. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments.
Yeah.
Would you like to reflect upon it?
No, it's
All right.
really
Thank
great.
you very
Yeah.
much. Thank you very much. And this has been a great panel. Thank you for your comments, Professor Bekish, Professor Phillips. Thank you for the members of the panel and for your lovely questions. Thank you very much once again. See you in 10 minutes.